Congressman Jerry Litton believes that a democracy depends on an informed people. He also believes our government should be more accessible to the people. To better inform the people of what is happening in their government, Congressman Jerry Litton of Missouri's 6th District brings Washington personalities to Missouri each month to discuss key issues facing our nation. Dialogue with Litton brings you closer to your government and Washington closer to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're fortunate indeed to have with us a guest today who for 3 years in a row has been on the Gallup poll list of the 10 most admired women in the world. Last year, she was picked for the television award of the Woman of the Year in the area of public affairs. She's the only woman in America who has ever been a serious candidate for President of the United States. She received 152 delegate votes at the National Democratic Convention and 72 for President. Many observers who followed her in the California primary and the television debates that covered that primary have said that she outdebated all of the major Democratic candidates for president in those TV debates. She represents an area very much unlike the 6th District of Missouri. She's a warm, she's a beautiful human being. She's been very kind to me in my first term in office. Anytime I have constituents from North Missouri that are with me in Washington and we meet Shirley Chisholm, she stops to talk with them. And not just to say hello, but to talk with them. Because this lady likes people, and it shows. We're lucky to have her in Washington. We're fortunate to have her with us here in North Missouri. She's the #1 woman in American politics. Let us welcome warmly to North Missouri, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm. You don't know how happy I am to see you here today.
I'm very, very glad to be here today. Ladies and gentlemen, I deem this a real opportunity, and not only an opportunity, but a real pleasure to be here this afternoon in this section of Missouri. For quite some time, your congressman came to Washington, D.C. I have had the pleasure of learning a great deal about the rural areas of the country. One of the real difficulties in Washington, D.C. is that although the House of Representatives is comprised of 435 members, said members come from different sections of this country and are not always able to empathize with the problems and the concerns of other areas. The people from the urban areas don't always understand the concerns of the people from the rural areas and vice versa. And so often when we vote negatively against the rural area, or the rural area politicians vote against the urban areas, it is not because there is a resentment or a kind of detachment. It is because there is an ignorance of the situation. And what is needed is people who have compassion and concern to try to educate those of us from the urban area. And I want to say that Jerry Litton has been very instrumental in helping to educate Shirley Chisholm, a woman that comes from a real urban area in the center of this country. We must not be afraid to speak out about the inequities and the grievances in our system, because I think most of us recognize a long time ago that we were told, if you love anything or you love anybody or you're interested in a particular situation, you don't sweep the negatives of the situation under the proverbial rug, but you have the courage, the audacity, and the nerve to stand up and be counted and to talk about these things so that together we can dialogue, so that together we can communicate, so that together, even though you and I may differ on different issues, so that even if you don't understand everything that I say or that I do, and I hope you don't expect me to understand everything that you say or do, because you are the sum total of your own life's experiences, and I am the sum total of my own life's experiences. But the important thing is, are we matured enough to dialogue, to communicate, to understand, to learn? And so I come here this afternoon to learn from you, to hear some of your questions and your concerns. And I hope that as I answer some of your questions and some of your concerns, that you can also learn from me, and that maybe together in this kind of way all across this nation, just Americans, regardless of their race, color, creed, or sex, will be able to realize that beneath the melanin of our skin, that we are just human beings. Thank you.
Why don't we move right on into the questions and answers? And I know many of you have a lot of things that are on your minds. If you'll come to the microphones and state your question, state your name and your town, if you would, first. The microphone on my right, the microphone here on my left, and we'd be happy to field those questions.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Walters from Kirksville, Missouri, and I'd like to ask Ms. Chisholm what she thinks the future is for the women in politics today and in the future.
Oh, I think the future is a beautiful one. I think that we have to recognize that in our nation, we have a tendency to become too hung up on sex, physically, psychologically, and emotionally. We need to use our physical and our mental talents and abilities that the good Lord has given to us for the amelioration of conditions in the United States of America. And there's no psychological test as yet, my dear lady, that indicates that either one of the two sexes have a superiority over the other one in terms of gray brain matter. But what we need to do, that the bright men and the bright women in this nation need to help to put our country together. And don't be afraid to recognize it. They're stupid men, and they're stupid women. They're brilliant men, and they're brilliant women. And we need to use the talents of those of us who have said talents to help our nation. I do a great deal of traveling. I've traveled in other parts of the world, and I've never seen a nation so hung up on sex as I have in this nation. And that's why so many of us have to spend a lot of time on the psychoanalyst and the psychiatrist's couch.
When she was talking about stupid men, was she looking at you, Jim? I couldn't figure that out. She has another question.
I just want to know if you have any ideas of how we could overcome this problem of sex between the men and the women.
I think first of all,
you can have that one.
Recently, I noticed that we were somewhat successful in getting affirmative action and equal rights through the steel industry. What has been done and what is going to be done about the federal government taking affirmative action? Too many times when you get above the level of GS-11, say, they're all by men, and men are the ones that are approving the application blanks. And I have several, 3 or 4 incidences I can mention.
First of all, I wanted to make it quite clear that I love men. Now, having said that, let me say that one of the most difficult things to really have carried out is these affirmative action programs, even though they're on the books. Because so often the persons who are in the authoritative position to carry out these programs have very deep-seated biases about certain segments of the population. Because many of these persons who are on that level carrying out the regulations are persons who have advanced through the ranks and may tend to be persons who are 55 or better, and therefore traditionally have a certain preconditioned attitude about women and other people, asking for this equal rights. So you have this question of seniority even in the executive agencies. You can't expect men in this society, a Western society, in which they have been traditional ideas inculcated in the minds of the total population as to what women should and must do, as to what blacks should and must do. You can't expect these men overnight to really jump on the bandwagon and say there's a change. It's coming, and they won't be able to stop it. It's coming.
I might add that a lot of my colleagues in the House would no doubt agree with what I'm about to say. The women that we have in the House of Representatives, 16, is that how many are there now? 16. I think most of my male colleagues would have to admit that the average caliber and quality of these 16 would exceed the average of the men, because the women who got elected had some very difficult handicaps to overcome within their own district, within their own community, and gathering support from the party and gathering contributions to run for office. And those women who are within the 16 in the House of Representatives are very competent, very capable, and very aggressive, and very highly regarded by their male colleagues from within the House.
Jerry, I think that I think people understand this. They may not want to articulate it the way you do, but I think that it is recognized that today in political office, and particularly holding an office as high as a member of the House of Representatives, that the women have to be eminently qualified.
I heard a speaker the other day say that he thought that maybe this next election might be the best year for women in politics, because thus far, outside of one secretary, most of the people involved in Watergate have been men.
That's right.
So, let's get a question over here.
Could you tell me if there's been any progress on the bill in Congress concerning the Airlines Mutual Aid Pact?
There's a bill that's been introduced which would prevent one airlines from helping another airlines in this mutual aid pact, which in the opinion of some prolongs the strike. Now, the bill that I introduced, that bill, by the way, has not been brought up for hearing, and of course nothing can be done until the committee brings it up for a hearing. I've been told that there's very little likelihood that the bill will ever have a hearing. The bill that I introduced is a compromise somewhere between that position and the position what we now have. My bill would prevent TWA or any airlines from profiting because of a strike through the mutual airline pact. In other words, I don't think it's fair that we have a situation whereas an airlines might find it more profitable to continue a strike than to settle. I think that it's important that the people who are on strike and the people who are being struck both have an incentive and a reason to want to settle the strike. That's why I introduced the bill. Neither bills have been brought up for hearing.
I have a question for Shirley.
Yes.
I'm Lucy Murphy from Chillicothe. I'd like to ask you about Amnesty.
It is felt by many persons, including myself, that because of a war that was very, very unpopular, a war that had nothing really to do with the preservation of our own borders, a war that had to do with the conflict of some people's morality in their own consciences, that now that the war is over, and now that the country is still polarized and divided along other lines, that maybe what we can do as an act of grace, if you will, is to really just provide amnesty for all of those men who are hiding, in Canada, Norway, and Sweden, but not provide amnesty in terms of the fact that these men would then return to their country and not have to be obligated in terms of rendering some kind of basic service to this nation. So what I am saying, maybe I'm saying in a sense, a conditional kind of amnesty where many people don't agree. Many people say no amnesty at all. I say a conditional amnesty, and some say no amnesty, period. But I am saying, and I've searched my conscience, because I'm very concerned about where this country is going and how it's drifting. I'm very concerned about the thousands of young men who belong here, who are not here. I'm very concerned about what is happening right now in this government, and that if in some way we can find it in our hearts to patch up one particular area to help to bring us together, that maybe this might be one of the ways. But I'm saying amnesty in terms of having some kind of condition. Now, I know this is a very controversial question. I'm not here to convert anybody to my way of thinking, but that is my feeling about it in terms of the total perspective on the American scene today.
I think we have another factor that probably enters into the amnesty picture now that we may not have had before, and that is we now have a totally volunteer armed services, which means that our military personnel in terms of numbers are down. We don't have the people in the Army that we normally would have outside of what I think is too many troops abroad, but that's another question. We now feel in our philosophy that it would be better if people would serve 20 years rather than 2. At one time in the military, we spent a short period of time training troops to march, fire an M1 rifle. Now they spend most of 2 years learning how to handle very sophisticated equipment. In other words, they may spend most of their 2 years learning their trade and have very little time left to perform that trade. So when we have a voluntary army, when it's reduced in size, I think it's terribly important that if a time should come when we should need a draft, when we should need people to respond to that draft, when we would need to issue a call, that the young people of this country would respond to that call. So I think we have to be very cautious and very carefully. Now again, it's me personally speaking. How we administer amnesty, I'm not in favor of total amnesty. I would be in favor of conditional amnesty, provided that condition were such that most people would accept it as a reasonable alternative to that which they were asked to serve in before. I think we have to offer enough punishment to those who openly and willfully violated the law to serve as a model or example to others who might decide, if we did issue a call to the Army, that they too were going to interpret the law the way they saw fit and not respond. Question over here.
Yes, everyone knows that President Nixon has had some trouble with his tax returns.
You noticed that.
Which to me brings up the whole question of tax reform. My question is, and this is to both of you, what can we do and what can you do to make sure that this problem isn't forgotten after Watergate? And I'd also like to ask Congresswoman Chisholm what she thinks of dialogue like this that we're doing today.
Well, let me take the latter part because that's easier to answer. Dialogue like this is needed all over this nation. This is a wonderful forum because if Congressman Litton did not give me, and I'm going to put it that way, give me the opportunity to come in here and speak with you, I'm sure that there are many of you in this room had conditioned or preconceived attitudes about that woman from New York because you didn't know her. But by having the opportunity to hear me and to talk with me, people could say, well, you know, she's not a screaming black radical woman. She's a woman with sense. If I didn't come here today, there are probably a lot of people in this room that might feel that way. It's understandable because of what we have done to certain ethnic groups and certain peoples in this country. So from that standpoint, the communication is beautiful. It gives people an opportunity to see and hear those figures who are playing a certain role in this country, whether or not you agree with what the person is saying. There's a dialogue going on. Secondly, with respect to tax reform, I'm a real pessimist. I'm a real pessimist when it comes to reform, the word reform in terms of the American people from this standpoint. Americans have very short memories, and we react to emergencies and we react to crises. We never act in terms of projected plans. I have a sneaking suspicion that if and when the whole Watergate situation is over and we do not have concomitant movement at this moment in the United States Congress with respect to tax reform, that too will be forgotten. Because once the Watergate situation is over, the American people will probably not be asking a lot of questions that they're asking now. And history shows that about the psyche of the American people. And that is why if we're really going to have tax reform, it must move now along with other things. If not, I have the feeling that it will drag its feet, because you must remember who is controlling many of the interests in Congress and who are the major pressure groups in Washington, D.C.
We have to add to that, I think, as long as we have taxes and a tax structure with two purposes: one, to collect money with which to run our country, and the other purpose being to cause people to do things, that it's very difficult for us to have a real fair and equitable tax structure. If it was simply a matter of collecting revenue from which to run our government, I think it would be more easy or easier to make it fair. But so many aspects of our tax structure today are designed to cause businessmen to invest or to back up from their investment, to cause people to spend or to spend less, to speed up our economy, to slow down the economy. And some of it is good, because some of it is a needed facet of our society to guard against depression, recession, inflation, and some of those peaks and valleys that happen in our economy. But as long as we use the tax system to cause people to do things, I think it's very difficult for it to be fair and equitable at the same time. I do think that hopefully we'll get some kind of reform in the area of minimum wage, minimum taxes to come out in this next year. Some of the other reforms in areas of capital gains and all that have been discussed, I agree with Shirley. I don't expect it to happen.
James Curry Buckland. In reference to the farmers in our area, they're plowing. Are they going to be left holding the sack if these prices go down?
Well, I think the farmers of America are being asked to gamble right now. Yeah. By that I mean the farmers are being asked to gamble that the weather will be such in Australia and China and Russia and in many markets around the world that the demand that is being forecast by our government for farm products will be there come harvest time. And I don't think we can really say for sure whether the market will be there or not, because we don't know if it'll rain in Australia. We don't know if the demand will continue in China and Russia for farm commodities. But the error that was made, quite frankly, was in the Farm Bill. We had within that Farm Bill target prices for each of the grain commodities, which would offer a level that would permit the farmer to be encouraged to produce, and if the price didn't bring that level, he would at least be assured of getting it. The administration threatened to veto the entire Farm Bill if we did not take out an escalator clause within the bill which would raise those target prices if the cost of production went up. Now, we have an escalator clause in Social Security. We have it in federal employees have a cost of living clause within their pay scale. But the farmers were asked not to have that cost of living clause in the Farm Bill. Now, the farmers will be hurt first, but the people who are going to be hurt the most down the road are going to be consumers. They always are. And I might say to this group here that one of the people in Congress who understand this in an urban area is Shirley Chisholm. And we've visited frequently about the Farm Bill. And many of you people here, I'm sure, are going to be surprised. But on the Farm Bill, we were within one vote. One vote all day long on getting a major part of the Farm Bill passed. And I'll tell you that Shirley Chisholm was voting for the Farm Bill.
And I would like to say this. I'd like to say this, and I'd like to be honest about it. I come from an urban area. I know little or nothing about farms. And so I did for quite some time in Congress what a lot of people from the urban areas did. Many of us voted for measures 4 years ago that perhaps we should, voted against measures 4 years ago for the farmers that perhaps we should have voted for, because also we had congressmen from farm areas of this country who always would get up on the floor of the House and say, is that for New York City? Down. So you see, there was this lack of communication. If it was for New York City, some people are so anti-New York, it's not even funny. So what we would do, we had a tendency then to each other. And we found out one thing, that in playing this kind of regional politics, we were hurting American people. And that we had to begin to learn to understand about other sections of the country. And I'm proud to say that recently I have been voting for farm issues, and I want to thank Jerry Litton for educating me along those lines, because I am just as dumb about things pertaining to farming, what I am learning. And that is why it is so important that whatever we do, regardless of the section of the country we are from, that we do not hurt the American people.
The time has gone quickly, very quickly, and the time is gone, and we have no time for more questions, although I'm sure that after we conclude this program that Shirley Chisholm would be most happy to visit with some of you who would like to come up here to the stage, as would I. We have some very interesting guests in the future. In 2 months, we have a man who many consider the second most powerful man in the United States, and I'm speaking of Carl Albert, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. The following month, we have a very conservative, Republican, young congressman from your state, Shirley, Jackie Kemp, former quarterback of the Buffalo Bills, who will be our guest then. We have a very exciting guest next month that I know you people here will enjoy and appreciate. She, too, is a woman. She's very young, in her 30s. She'll be bringing with her her husband and her 2 children. She's aggressive, very talented, very articulate, very frank and very outspoken. She's a member of the Armed Services Committee. She's been fighting military spending while she's been on that committee. She's Pat Schroeder from Denver, Colorado. And she's really frank and outspoken in the true Harry Truman tradition, right?
Yes.
They're in for a treat, are they not?
Yes, I think so.
She'll be our guest next month, and I hope that you come back then for our dialogue for Litton. Thank you very much for coming.
You have been watching Dialogue with Litton, a taped portion of an unrehearsed program presented each month on this station by Congressman Jerry Litton of Missouri's 6th District.